Okay, goodbye, Angie. She's heading off. Goodbye, everybody who's logging out. It's your loss, though, because this is phenomenal, friends. Here we are for the final session. We're going to be talking about tying curriculum to the real world. And because we were blabbing about other things, I forgot to ask this question of Laura, I think, which is, do you want me to share the slides, or would you, okay, that was a pretty definite yes. So I will be sharing our slides. Give me a second to pull that up. As usual, you can use the chat over in the side to ask questions. We'll try to track that as best we can. And share screen. See, it doesn't, I tried to do it right this time, but it did not show, because that's, are you still seeing my edit screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't have any other option, even though I opened it first.
Can
I can do it now, but it's like it always requires twice.
do you turn it to present before you share screen or after?
Well, that time I did it before.
Oh, that's weird.
I know, and actually now it really isn't even giving me the option. There's no way this could be related to the bourbon, right?
No.
No, really.
Well, it was chewy bourbon, so I'm not sure what you're drinking.
Is that still not working?
It's not.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm gonna, yeah, I mean, you can see it there. And now I go to share screen. Oh, it's finally there. This is crazy. It's just imploding on me.
What if you, so
what are you looking at now? Still the same?
No, we can see the slide now.
Okay.
Yeah, go forward.
Yeah, but this is not a joke.
Yeah.
I cannot see the slide now, and I'm not kidding. Okay, I think we'll go.
We're good.
Hey guys, that's the ACE framework. Perhaps you've heard of it. The main thing that we're looking at here, there's lots of parts of ACE that are related to this, but what we're really looking at here is the connection piece. And we're trying to think here about how curriculum is linked to context. So outside of COVID, this is actually really important. What COVID has kind of done is it's given us an opportunity to realize that context deeply matters to students. So what we tend to do when we teach, I think, is that you leave things at the classroom door, you go in, you teach your class as if it's somehow completely unhinged from the world if you're not doing some kind of project that really depends on connecting. But COVID has made us realize, I think quite alarmingly, that the outside world is inside our classes at all times. So part of what we're talking about in this particular presentation is what can we do with that that's maybe helpful to our students to really make context a part of the class. And so in this case, how COVID might matter. We have a great team of folks, which do not include me, talking about this each time from different disciplinary perspectives. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves as they start off, and we are going to start with Laura.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Tillman and I teach anthropology. And I taught COVID after the spring break in a lot of different ways, from like very small, one reading in my anthropology of migration course, and it was a very small part of that, to 4 weeks where we looked at COVID-19 in my medical anthropology, medical sociology course from lots of different angles and connected it to stuff we'd done earlier in this semester. So the other folks presenting after me are going to talk about ways in which they connected the current pandemic to their courses and have other examples. But what I'm going to do to start off with is not talk about what I did specifically, but to give you kind of like a general overview. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first is, if you're interested in doing this in the fall or afterwards, because it won't go away in the fall, it will still be relevant to students' lives after that. Where can you find resources? So you're saving yourself work. Second thing will be some cautionary things to think about as you're finding resources, especially as you venture further and further from what your wheelhouse is. And then some sort of final sort of thoughts about taking care of students for whom this is not just an academic interesting thing, but also something that is radically affecting their lives. So this first slide is just giving you some ideas about where to find resources. And I'll tell you where I found resources. So your professional or discipline organization, probably when everyone was going to that remote pivot, a lot of organizations were putting out, edited collections, or, different publishing houses are making certain things freely accessible to sort of help people. So there might be webinars, there might be sample syllabi, there might be sample assignments that folks in your discipline looking at this pandemic through the sort of disciplinary lens that you are familiar with that have already created. So save yourself some time and look at that. I've found that Twitter is there's some cautionary tales later about Twitter, but it is also a really great place to sort of find what other folks in your discipline and outside your discipline are doing to teach about this. So I've put up some hashtags that I noticed people were using when they were talking about the work that they were doing in their classes. And I'm sure that there are others as well that might be, these are very general ones that are not specific to a particular discipline. There were a lot of folks like mid-March when everything was going crazy that started crowdsourcing syllabi that would be available as like a Google Doc that people could add to or add comments on that would get edited. I was involved with one that was anthropology focused, but I know there were so many other ones out there, historians, criminal justice folks, like any kind of discipline you could think about. Many people were trying to collect resources to help people sort of keep track of what was being published, often not peer-reviewed stuff, but stuff in newspapers, stuff in publications like The Atlantic or something like that, or blogs, to sort of collate that because there was such a flurry of people writing about it and thinking about it. And then another thing to just remember is that there's a lot of people on campus that can help you, that have expertise in different things. So if you want to go to the next slide, Robin. This is just a couple screenshots. So I'm a member of the American Anthropological Association as an anthropologist, and there is a COVID-19 resources webpage for my professional organization. I'm sure there is something like that for many of you as well. Time Magazine had a profile of one of those crowdsourced syllabi and talked about this, and I'll put a link to that in the slide deck. And then this is just one of the particular crowdsourced syllabi that I was involved with that was sort of sponsored by the Teaching and Learning Anthropology Journal. But there are many, many others out there. The second sort of thing I want to talk about a little bit is in your excitement to teach the virus, as some people said, to sort of know your limitations and to know how to find good experts and some things to think about. And these are all things that you're probably like, yeah, I know how to like consume media responsibly. These are things I teach my students. But I think especially because this is a new, new moment and a new disease, there's so much that we still don't really know about it. There's a lot, like a plethora of stuff being written. There's a lot of preprints, which are basically when scientists are trying to release data and study findings before they've gone through the peer review process that are, freely accessible online to sort of help that science develop, but it's still sort of novel and not necessarily has not been vetted, or it's still emerging. And then just a lot of think pieces and blogs and a lot of news coverage. And then it's like a really highly emotional topic for us as well as for our students. So this is, all the perfect ingredients for an infodemic, as some people call it. So there's just a lot out there that is not good information. So when I was trying to teach the virus in my classes, I tried to have a couple of things that I was trying to balance. One was trying to balance, like a news sort of lens where it was just reporting on things that were happening with more analytical pieces that would maybe take a longer view or more, more like sort of longer lens or a different sort of lens as opposed to just this happened and this happened and this happened. The other thing that I sort of found that I needed to balance was that because I was teaching undergraduates that didn't have a lot of expertise, they were still learning about this topic, it was hard sometimes to find resources on this that would sort of reach them where they were at as far as accessibility and language and lack of jargon and things like that. So there were a lot of really great pieces that were published as blogs or say like in the Atlantic or Salon or the New York Times or the New Yorker, all that sort of stuff. But sometimes a little bit of nuance would be lost in those sort of pieces because they were being written by like a science communicator or science reporter as opposed to the scientists who actually published that study that they're writing about. So there's some need to sort of think about like the sources that you're finding that are going to help you, especially thinking about what your student's background is. Oh, can you go back? Thanks. And then just another thing to be aware of is there's a lot of terms that are very specific to epidemiology or public health and virology and all these other things that are different from how we use them in our everyday language. Okay, so you can scroll ahead now. So I put this up because I saw a lot of people sharing it, even people that are really smart and really critical media, like aware of misinformation. But this was a study that it had an interesting graphic with a lot of, sweat and spray flowing behind this runner that was like, oh my gosh, I should stop running, okay. But it was published on Medium, which is basically just like an open platform that anyone can publish on. Often Medium articles have really good graphics and really nice formatting, so they seem very professional, but they're basically just like anyone can put stuff up there. And if sometimes you sort of follow along the chain, you can find that sometimes the stuff that got a lot of attention, Medium articles about the coronavirus, had to be retracted or like edited after the fact because they weren't like super awesome as far as accuracy of information. So this is just one example because I know a lot of people shared it. This is to sort of talk about the difficulty of like finding accessible articles, say written by a science communicator versus, a scientist or a specialist in a particular field. So Salon had this article about the Black Death and its sort of after effects, thinking about like what will change in our society with this pandemic. But they got a lot wrong about what actually happened after the Black Death. And this Yvonne Seal here is a specialist in that time period and sort of took them to task for a lot of inaccuracies in that reporting. Because again, it wasn't written by necessarily an expert in that. So trying to find those experts is, I think, a real important thing for you to do when you're trying to share resources with your students. This is another thing from, I took from Twitter. Nate Silver, a lot of people really trust him because he's a really well-known statistician. He published stuff with the New York Times. He has his blog 538.com, blah, 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 blah. But he's using this term that's very specific and has a very specific meaning, herd immunity, really loosely in ways that you really shouldn't. Which again, another person with an epidemiology background, again, sort of took him to task for. So these are just sort of things that, because there's just so much out there, especially if it's not in your wheelhouse, it's really hard to sift through who to trust. So just some cautionary things. And then also to, I call these folks armchair epidemiologists, but there's a lot of folks that are using this moment, maybe not really consciously or perhaps consciously to, get access and have increased their profile, not always with super amazing information or a lot of background knowledge or expertise. So some caution on that. The last thing I'll say is that, and we've talked about this so much all throughout today and yesterday, is to really think about caring for your students always. And whenever you're bringing this pandemic into your classroom, to realize that this pandemic has really disrupted their lives, not just their academic lives, but their mental health, their families' lives, their financial well-being, et cetera, to a greater or lesser extent. And you don't know all those stories. You shouldn't expect your students to always share those stories with you. So on the one hand, for some students, when I did incorporate the pandemic in my classes, I heard from some students that said like, wow, it was so nice to be able to think about this in a different way and sort of, digest what was just like news and social media stuff with more thought. So some people will really appreciate this in your classes, but also some people really don't need this in your classes. So maybe because they're getting it in other classes, or maybe just because it has really traumatized them. They might have a relative that was sick or that died, or they might have like extreme anxiety, and this just living in this moment is, talking about it in a class might help some of those folks, but it might make some of those folks make it worse. So my suggestion, and it's not something that I was really great at this semester, is to really encourage folks for the fall and onward is to make any assignments or reading about this as optional as you can, and to give as much choice to students as you can about how much they want to engage with this, and to not require students to ask for an alternative, to make those alternatives automatically available, because you don't want to have students have to some students are just not going to ask for that because they're going to be intimidated, but some students will really need those alternatives. So I'm sure you all know that because you've been hearing from your students as well, but that's just my last thing that I'll say is think about how you can do this thoughtfully, but also not make it too traumatic for folks for whom this is really traumatic. That's it for me.
Thank you. And I believe we are on to Denise.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's good to be here tonight and most of the day, actually, for many of us. So for those of you who don't know me, I teach marketing and communications in the School of Business. And so one of the classes I teach is event marketing. And so it was a little bit stressful for me on spring break to see what was happening. And I'm sure for all of our students as well, since this class is a project-based learning class and we have an external client and extended community leaders as a collaborative initiative. So I was thinking, well, what are we going to do with this class now, right? Because obviously our event's going to be postponed. And my seniors, so most of this class of 30 students, will not be able to see this actual event come to fruition. And this is entirely what our semester is based on. So trying to think about, what direction do we move in and how do we sort of, kind of move it forward. So basically, we weren't going to be able to do the event. So we decided that we wanted to create a Facebook page for community leaders, and our target audience is families who have children 0 to 5 years old and to birth. And so it's all about social and mental health. And kind of ironically, because a lot of us needed to be sort of thinking about our emotional health. And so talking to those parents and families and creating content for them to be able to see and use. So although we couldn't do the event, the idea was how do we pivot and still provide something that's useful to the people in need who really need it now. So providing to early childhood educators as well, as they were thinking about how do I bring curriculums online, what do we do? And so we pivoted, we had to use some technologies, and I put some things in place pretty quickly. And so built out a Microsoft Teams site that you can see here. We broke the class into half. So partly looked at marketing and promotion of the event, and the other was actually the planning and the logistics of the event. And so we had to pull it all online, and I know they were all very nervous about having to do this. And so, I created some channels on the sides for everything that we needed to do, and just really trying to keep them focused on, what we still have an important role here in the community. And we have, the New Hampshire Department of Education and Mary Cornish, who's our colleague, who's, she was our external client along with her other community leaders and collaborative. They're depending on us. So we wanted to make sure that we could pull something off. And in the end, be able to still move forward with the event as a plug and play kind of event when we're ready to execute. And we don't know if that'll even be in the fall at this point. So still a lot up in the air. So aside from event marketing, I also teach organizational communications as well. And so I really wanted to make sure, and you can move to the next slide, Robin, that I brought that information into our class as well, because being a communications course, writing and public speaking, we need to be out there paying attention to current events, thinking about how is the media handling this information. So talking about, kind of the pandemic, how's the White House handling it and the task force, what's the governor's communication in the different states that all our students are from, and looking at different trade associations like the let's say the society, Public Relations Society of America, which I'm a member of. And so kind of the information that they were putting out. And so all of this we did, but I didn't overly consume. So I would do the check-ins at the beginning to see how our students were doing, how are they feeling, talk about me personally, how we were doing, kind of look at that, and then talk about, what's going on in the world in terms of communication now, and what do we kind of need to focus on, where can we kind of take from, what do we like that we see, what could people be doing better. And then I felt it was really important to keep that connection point. So we did a face-to-face on the early part of the week. So we would all Zoom in together, and I had 3 different sections of this course. So I opened it up so all my students from all the different sections could join into whichever time fit their lives best. And really tried to keep it, kind of open and make sure that we could still stay connected. And I think they really did appreciate that. So there's a lot of things from this past semester that I would think about, how am I going to do it for next, kind of next semester, thinking about the same. So I'm going to turn it over actually to Katie, and she's going to talk a little bit more about some of these ideas.
Thank you. Thanks, Denise. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Katie Gaebel, and I am the co-director of career development at Plymouth State. And I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a different perspective here, kind of combine both what Denise was talking about and a little bit of what Laura was talking about, in that we can address the COVID-19 issue from a different perspective with our students. And that's kind of infusing that community-based learning and community impact with career readiness. And so from where I sit in career development, it seems like every week there are new surveys that are coming out asking employers about internships and job opportunities, both for our current students and our graduating seniors. And our students are very, very attuned to what's happening what's out there in the real world. And when I talk to students, there's this enhanced feeling of powerlessness that they're feeling. Many students who I've met with remotely since March have had offers rescinded, internships disappear, and even their summer jobs have disappeared. And so a lot of them are feeling powerless both to earn money and kind of financially support themselves or maybe their families if they've had a family member who's been laid off, but also kind of powerless to really go out and achieve some of those career readiness perspectives that we often talk about with students. So landing an internship helps them kind of in that real world experience. And so what I want to focus on is ways in which we can reframe for our students how COVID has created some opportunities with community partners to look at career readiness. And about 2 weeks after we started working from home, I had a meeting with the GRDC, and they represent a lot of small businesses in and around Plymouth, mostly, family owned or just really small companies, a handful of folks. And a lot of them came and said, we really would love students to participate with us more and really engage with us more. And instead of doing internships, which we can't offer right now for a variety of reasons, can your students do a 2 to 3 week project-based experience with us? Things like helping us rethink our website or rethink social media and how we reach out or market to different folks. And so reframing how we define an internship experience or a career readiness experience can often mean engaging with our local community partners. And really it's providing kind of that reciprocity and community engagement that we often talk about. So our community partners are getting something out of it, but our students are able to rethink and kind of pivot away from that traditional 10 to 12 week internship opportunity to how does a 2 to 3 week project-based or job shadow opportunity really offer them a chance to develop some of those career ready competencies. Okay, next slide. In my national organization that I'm a part of, which is NACE, they put together surveys with employers, and they ask them every year about competencies they consider essential in what they look for in new hires, but also essential to kind of keeping their organization running. And then they ask them those same questions about people who they've recently hired in who are new graduates or recent graduates. And I always like pointing to these numbers because what this shows is a gap between what our employers are saying they consider essential competencies in their new hires and what they're saying as people who are rated proficient in those competencies. And we in career development like to point to this gap and say, we don't think it's a lack of preparation around these competencies, but what we do think is that our students aren't being able to fully articulate how they're being prepared for these things in the classroom. So reframing on the competencies themselves and away from the who and where will help to enable the students to address a lot of these skill sets. Our students are going to have to cast their net much wider in the job market today, whether they're looking for an internship or a summer job or even that first job out of college. Many of them are going to have to, even just in the short term, kind of cast that net wider and really reconsider how they reframe things like their resume and their cover letter to focus on these competencies and skill sets. So we trend away from the task and skill and towards those career competencies. And our community partners who are offering things like internship, short-term internship opportunities, job shadowing, and project-based experiences can help our students do that. And by extension, our students really are going to be empowered to kind of enter into that recession world that we're hearing a lot about in career readiness.
So I'm going to invite Suzanne to take us all home. I realize that this session, because we do have a lot of speakers, is going to run just a little bit over. But if you can manage to stick with me till 9:05, I think you'll be rewarded. It's really great way to end the day by having one of our public health experts take the stage.
So I'm Suzanne Gallagher in public health here, thank you for being here at the very last presentation, the very end of the day. So I wanted to actually talk about maintaining community university partnerships during this time and talk about a specific project I did with my students this semester, the community health needs assessment. So this was a couple of students that were placed with different community-based organizations across the state of New Hampshire that were collaborating together with each other and with Plymouth's, with Midstate Health and the state public health department to do a community health needs assessment, which is required every 3 years and feeds into the community health improvement plan, which is happens every 5 years, and they both happen to fall on this year. So both are happening simultaneously of each other. And so our students were helping to provide feedback for the survey and help to create a plan for engaging with community partners and community stakeholders to get their voice included into the process. And it was really interesting as we moved right after spring break into the stay at home, and the students weren't on campus anymore, and we weren't actually meeting with our community partners in person anymore, but we continued to meet with our partners every week. And it really gave our students an opportunity to increase their skill set in terms of how they did this work, and we kept moving forward. It helped our students sort of think about the disparities in health, which is in our field, we really want our students to think about the social determinants of health and specifically health disparities. And it's a concept that's a little bit complicated for a lot of people in our communities to understand, and this provided a really great opportunity because it was so present in the news, and the field of public health was so present in the news as well. And so the students got to sort of see exactly what the field they were going into, what it looked like to actually practice. So I wanted to end here with thinking about serving in place and what that looks like for our community partners, because there's a lot of resources available for what community engaged learning looks like specifically right now. So a lot of universities pivoting and thinking about community engaged learning. And so, and I wanted to kind of integrate ACEs. And in my notes, when you have access to the slide deck, there's a lot more resources inside the notes, but to think about adaptability, communicating with our students and partners, and checking in with our partners. It's really important to think about checking in with partners on and off campus and then developing contingency plans. And this is also a really good skill for students, and thinking about, okay, what are we doing now? How are we pivoting? And what is our new process going to look like? Because so much of what we were talking about today is the importance of the process itself. But that, you know, I think earlier Liz had mentioned adds value to the world, and this whole idea of the real world and integrating with students, and that being on campus and being a student is real. And so how do we align our students? And public health does this naturally. But the COVID-19, it does provide a really great opportunity for anyone in any discipline to integrate the everything that's happening, the context that we're dealing with right now within their own discipline. To think about what are the potential public health lessons that can be present in our courses. But just to wrap up, the connection, identifying prioritized needs of partners, and ways that student involvement can continue online. And so really kind of wanting to make sure that we're still meeting the needs of our students and our partners. And then just something that is, sorry for the typo, but equity, supporting our students always, but then using this opportunity to lift up social justice and think about ways that we can talk with our students about bias and discrimination, which we're seeing so present right now in the news. And that this is a great way to sort of help our students see how this plays out and in real time. And that's, I think, where I'm going to end. I need to keep to my time.
Thank you. So I don't want to keep people over time, so I think I'll just end with this thought that we've been talking about in the chat and actually throughout the day, and maybe make an offer, which is that I think it sounds like there is some interest in trying to figure out how to integrate some of the varied projects that might be taking shape around COVID. And by that, I don't mean integrate to create one big project. I just mean, and by the way, you know, it's getting darker in my house and I haven't turned on any lights, so I feel like nobody could see me, but maybe what we can do is create kind of a sort of spoken hub model or something where we've got this idea of this pandemic that we are all navigating, and we may just have lots of different work that the university can do on behalf of our community around COVID. And maybe we can create some architecture to put those things together so that there's some conversations. I'm thinking about everything from technology that could integrate it to colloquia where we could talk about it, to some interdisciplinary project collaboration. So for those who are interested in that stuff, maybe just be in touch. And what I'd really love, because I would not be the person to like spearhead that, we would, the collab would offer support for that kind of work. So particularly if there's some faculty leaders who think that sounds fun and you don't already have a big project of your own, but this, you know, kind of project management or architecture sounds interesting, let us know. I really want to thank this group a lot, and I really want to thank all of you for participating into the night. And finally, I just want to say thank you, because we really had almost no time to put this together. And obviously what happened today is that people from so many different offices across staff and faculty, particularly IT and academic technology in the back end, but everybody that I asked pretty much was happy to assist, and I'm so grateful to all of you. So thank you for coming. I will not kick you out of the Zoom room, but I'm going to stop recording because that is the end of our presentation.